It's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Really happy to be with you, and I've got a great surprise. So yesterday I did not get to read in the new book that I've started, Little House on the Prairie, because I could not find that book. In fact, I still haven't found that book. I have no idea where I put it. But I prayed about it, and I decided that I was going to order the whole series so that I could read all these stories by Laura Ingalls Wilder, and because I just think they're very good. Well, when I ordered it, it said that I had ordered it like 2 years ago, and I was surprised about that. I didn't remember that. So when I went looking again, guess what I found? I found, I'm going to show you, this whole box of books. Brand new, I'd never opened it. And so I have the story we're going to read out of Little House in the Big Woods. We're on chapter 3 now. And it's called The Long Rifle. So I'm going to point out some things to you if I can here. So this is how Pa hung his gun over a couple pegs. These were pegs, above the doorway. Now this is a rifle, so it's long. This end would go up against somebody's shoulder, and that's called the butt end. And this long part here, that's called the barrel. And you can't see it very well, but I'll show you. Right? So you see the barrel. And underneath that, there's another long metal thing. That's called the ramrod. And up here, can't see it very well, that's where the trigger is. And down here, this is the trigger. And this is the hammer up here that you pull back. Now this is a cow horn that he fills with powder and a little pouch that is filled with what they call caps that make a gun shoot. So this was a musket, really. The long rifle. Every evening before he began to tell stories, Pa made bullets for his next day's hunting. Laura and Mary helped him. They brought the big, long-handled spoon and the box full of bits of lead and the bullet mold. While he squatted on the hearth and made bullets, they sat one on each side of him and watched. First, he melted the bits of lead in the big spoon held in the coals. When the lead was melted, he poured it carefully from the spoon into a little hole in the bullet mold. He waited a minute, then he opened the mold and out dropped a bright new bullet onto the hearth. The hearth is usually would have been stone, almost like a step right outside the fireplace, so that if a spark came out, it wouldn't catch fire. Now the bullet was too hot to touch, but it shined so temptingly that sometimes Laura or Mary could not help but touch it. Then they burned their fingers, but they did not say anything because Pa had told them never to touch a new bullet. If they burned their fingers, it was their own fault. They should have minded him. So they put their fingers in their mouth to try to cool them and watched him make more bullets. There would be a shining pile of them on the hearth before Pa stopped. He let them cool, and then with his jackknife he trimmed off the little lumps left by the hole in the mold, because the bullets needed to be smooth. He gathered up the tiny shavings of lead and saved it carefully to melt again the next time he made bullets. The finished bullets he put in his bullet pouch. This was a little bag which Ma had made beautifully out of buckskin from a buck, that's a deer, that Pa had shot. After the bullets were made, Pa would take his gun down from the wall and he would clean it. Out in the snowy woods all day, it might have gathered a little dampness, and the inside of the barrel was sure to be dirty from the powder smoke. So Pa would take the ramrod from its place under the gun barrel and fasten a piece of clean cloth to the end. Then he stood the butt of the gun in a pan on the hearth, and he poured boiling water from the tea kettle into the gun barrel. Then he quickly dropped the ramrod in and rubbed it up and down, while the hot water turned black from the powdered smoke, and it spurted out the little hole on which the cap was placed when the gun was loaded. Pa kept pouring in more water and washing the gun barrel with a little cloth on the ramrod until the water ran clear. Then the gun was clean. The water must always be boiling so that the heated steel would dry instantly, otherwise it could rust. Then Pa put a clean grease rag on the ramrod, and while the gun barrel was still hot, he greased it well on the inside. With another clean greased cloth, he rubbed it all over outside. Every bit of it was oiled and sleek. After that, he rubbed and polished the gun stock until the wood of it was bright and shiny too. Now he was ready to load the gun again, and Laura and Mary must help him. So here are the girls. They're going to be helping their dad when he loads that gun. Standing straight and tall, holding the long gun upright on its butt, while Laura and Mary stood on either side of him, Pa said, "Now you watch me and tell me if I make a mistake." So they watched very carefully, but he never made a mistake. Laura handed him the smooth, polished cow horn full of gunpowder. The top of the horn was a little metal cap. Pa filled this cap full of gunpowder and poured the powder down the barrel of the gun. Then he shook the gun a little and tapped the barrel to be sure that all the powder was together in the bottom. "Where's my patch box?" he asked then, and Mary gave him the little tin box full of little pieces of greased cloth. Pa laid one of these bits of greasy cloth over the muzzle of the gun. Then he put one of the shiny new bullets on it, and with the ramrod he pushed the bullet and the cloth down in the gun barrel. Then he pounded them tightly against the powder. When he hit them with the ramrod bounced back out of the gun barrel. Pa caught it and he thrust it down again. He did this over and over for a long time. Next, he put the ramrod back in its place against the gun barrel. Then, taking the box of caps from his pocket, he raised the hammer, so it's almost like this, raised the hammer of the gun and slipped one of the bright caps, over the hollow pin that was under the hammer. He let the hammer down slowly and carefully. If it came down quickly, bang, the gun would go off. Now the gun was loaded, and Pa laid it on the hooks over the door. When Pa was at home, the gun always laid across those 2 wooden hooks above the door. Pa had whittled the hooks out of green sticks with his knife and had driven their straight ends deep into holes in the log. He hooked the curved ends upwards, and that held the gun securely. Now, I'm going to show you this picture. This has the things that Pa needed when he was making bullets. You can see the tea kettle and a pan and like the big spoon things here. Even the little bullets I can see there. The gun was always loaded and always above the door so that Pa could get to it quickly and easily anytime he needed it. When Pa went into the big woods, he always made sure that the bullet pouch was full of bullets, and the tin patch box and the box of caps were in his pockets. The powder horn and the sharp hatchet hung at his belt, and he carried the gun ready, loaded, on his shoulder. He always reloaded the gun as soon as he had fired it. He said he did not want to meet trouble on an empty gun. Whenever he shot a wild animal, he had to stop and load the gun again. Measure the powder, put it in, shake it down, put them in the patch and the bullet and pound them down, and then put a fresh cap under the hammer before he could shoot it again. When he shot at a bear or a panther, he must kill it with the first shot. A wounded bear or panther could kill a man before he had time to reload. That's different than now. Now, guns can hold many bullets, and you just keep pulling the trigger and shooting. But Laura and Mary were never afraid when Pa went alone in the big woods. They knew he would always kill bears and panthers with the first shot. After the bullets were made and the gun was loaded, came story time. "Tell us about the voice in the woods," Laura would beg him. Pa wrinkled up his eyes at her and said, "Oh, no. You don't want to hear about the time I was a naughty little boy." "Oh, yes, we do. We do," Laura and Mary said. So Pa began the story of Pa and the voice in the woods. When I was a little boy, not much bigger than Mary, I had to go every afternoon to find the cows in the woods and drive them home. My father told me never to play by the way, but to hurry and bring the cows home before dark, because there were bears and wolves and panthers in the woods. One day I started earlier than usual, so I thought I didn't need to hurry. There were so many things in the woods that I forgot it was going to be dark. There were red squirrels in the trees, chipmunks scurrying through the leaves, little rabbits playing games together in open places. Little rabbits, you know, always have games together before they go to bed. I began to play that I was a mighty hunter, stalking wild animals and Indians. Remember, this is a different time than now. And now we never talk about going after other people. That's wrong. I played I was fighting the Indians until the woods seemed full of wild men. And then, all at once, the bird twittering good night, I heard. It was dusky in the path and dark in the woods. I knew I must get the cows home quickly, or it would be black night before they were safe in the barn. And I couldn't find the cows. I listened, but I couldn't hear their bells. I called, but the cows didn't come. I was afraid of the dark and the wild beasts, but I dared not go home to my father without the cows. So I ran through the woods, hunting and calling. All the time the shadows were getting thicker and darker, and the woods seemed larger, and the trees and the bushes looked strange. I could not find the cows anywhere. I climbed up hills looking for them and calling. I went down into dark ravines, calling and looking. I stopped and listened for the cowbells, but there was not a sound but the rustling of leaves. Then I heard loud breathing and thought a panther was there in the dark behind me, but it was my own breathing. My bare legs were scratched by the briars, and when I ran through the bushes, the branches struck me. But I kept on looking and calling, "Sulky, Sulky, Sulky, Sulky," I shouted with all my might. "Sulky," that was the name of the cow. Right over my head, I heard something say, "Ooh." My hair stood straight on end. "Ooh, ooh," the voice said again. And then, how did I run? Do you see that? What's making that "ooh" sound? I forgot all about those cows. All I wanted was to get out of the dark woods to get home. That thing in the dark came after me and called again, "Ooh, ooh." I ran with all my might. I ran till I couldn't breathe, and I still kept on running. Something grabbed my foot and down I went. Up I jumped, and then I ran. Not even a wolf could have caught me. At last I came out of the dark woods by the barn. There stood all the cows, waiting to be let through the bars. I let them in and then ran to the house. My father looked up and said, "Young man, what makes you so late? Been playing by the way?" And this is what he looked like when he was running. I looked down at my feet, and then I saw that one big toenail had been torn clean off. I had been so scared that I had not felt it hurt until that very minute. Pa always stopped telling his story here and waited until Laura said, "Go on, Pa. Please, go on." "Well," Pa said, "then your grandpa went out into the yard and cut a stout switch." A switch is a little thin branch. "And he came back into the house and gave me a good thrashing so that I would remember to mind him after that. A big boy of 9 years old is old enough to remember," he said. "There's a good reason for what I tell you to do," he said. "And if you'll do as you're told, no harm will come to you." "Yes, yes, Pa," Laura would say, bouncing up and down on Pa's knees. "And then what did he say?" "He said, if you obeyed me as you should have, you wouldn't have been out in the big woods after dark, and you wouldn't have been scared by a screech owl." That's the end of that story. It's important to obey. And obedience is doing what we're told to do when we're told to do it. Sometimes that's kind of hard. Sometimes we get distracted, just like Pa did in this story, by other things that seem a little fun. But it's important to remember to obey. Well, I hope you like the story. I'll be reading to you again tomorrow. I want to pray blessings on you and yours in your house and out of your house, in the day and in the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. Good night.